And okay, so you've now been told it's in progress. If anybody doesn't want something recorded, they can leave, because we have to ask if everybody's okay with it for privacy purposes. So I'm just going to share my screen with you guys. Now you should be seeing my screen now, are you? Can somebody let me know if you
Yes, we are, Sheila.
Okay, yes. Great, thanks a lot. Okay, so what we're going to talk about today basically is three things that people have to navigate close to Nanaimo: Dodd Narrows, False Narrows, and Pirates Cove. So we're going to start off, for those that are not too familiar with this area, and I don't know where you're all from, so some people may be here that are not that familiar with the Nanaimo area. Here's Nanaimo itself, Nanaimo Harbour and Departure Bay. That's all the Nanaimo area. If you go down the Northumberland Channel, Dodd Narrows is here. You go through Dodd Narrows, you can go through Ruxton Passage here, down in, and Pirates Cove is right in here, and you can come back up through False Narrows. Or you can do it the other way around. This is what we do with our student cruise when we have students that are not virtual. When we have in-class students, we actually take them on this cruise as a learning exercise at the end of the course. So I'm going to start off with a little video that was actually taken on one of our cruises. Oh, shoot. Okay, now you're hearing me again?
Can hear you now.
You didn't get the sound on that? I think I screwed up something there. Okay, you'll get it on the audio, I guess, when we send you the link with the actual recording. Sorry about that. I'm new at doing some of this stuff. Okay, so this is a blow up of the chart for Dodd Narrows. And as you can see, looking at it, lots of water through Dodd Narrows. Loads of water. So you don't have to worry about depth.
They're going to send the recording.
Can you mute yourself, please, whoever's talking?
Thank you.
There is a cable across the channel, but it's at a height of 121 feet. So not too many people have masts that high, so it's nothing to be worried about. The main thing we have to worry about in Dodd Narrows is the current. And that's just a photo of it from a plane, I guess. Two boats going through at fairly good speed. You can see there's a fair amount of turbulence at the north end there. This is looking south. So what do we have to know about Dodd Narrows? Okay, I just said that. Lots of depth all the way through, and plenty of deep water close to the shore on each side, so you don't have to watch out for shoals unless you're really, really right on the edge of the Narrows. But the main thing is to check your current strength before you go through. Currents in Dodd Narrows goes up to a max sometimes of about 9 knots, so they can be significant, and depending on the type of boat that you're in, they can be too much for you. So usually slower boats are going to transit it close to slack, not necessarily right on slack, but fairly close to slack. And then more powerful boats, power boats with strong engines and all the rest of it, are much less affected by the amount of current, although they can be affected quite a bit by it. It does get really busy in the summer.
Sorry, Sheila, I'm having trouble hearing you.
Are you? Nobody's hearing me?
Your volume's low, it seems.
Oh, hang on, sorry. That's probably, let me just...
Sheila, I can hear you loud and clear.
Oh, so
Okay.
it's
Okay.
maybe it's Morris that has his volume.
Okay, sorry.
Okay, as long as others are hearing me, that's the main thing. It does get busy in the summer. You get a lot of boats coming through. You get just close to slack. Sometimes I don't know, quite a number of boats lined up. What you have to do is get in line and take your turn and just follow the guy in front of you. Don't try and charge past people. That's the worst thing you can do. Take your time, and sailboats are probably going to be going through at about 5 knots or thereabouts. Sorry, powerboat guys, but you just have to take it nice and slow and easy. There used to actually be a 5 knot restriction going through Dodd. There were signs up, but they've taken those signs down, but that's about the safe speed to go through. You get a lot of tugs going through with towing log booms. They'll usually go on to the VHF and tell you that they're going to go through. Just, you can see them coming through. You can hear that they're going to tell you they're coming. You can see them coming through. Just stay right out of the Narrows until they're totally clear. The log booms can swing around a bit. They often have a second tug nudging the log booms to keep them from swinging around too much, but you sure don't want to be going through while they're going through. And as you're going through, basically, keep to starboard, so you're going to pass the other boats port to port. That's the safe way of doing it. So there's lots of room for boats to pass, so you can just go in line, go through, and keep to the same speed. You will get the odd stupid individual who wants to go through fast, charges through beside everybody, creating a huge wake, which really tosses sailboats particularly around. Very bad manners, and it shouldn't happen. When you've got a smaller sailboat, your maximum speed under engine, or maximum speed under anything, is going to be anything from about 5 to about 6 or 7 knots. So they're limited by how fast they can go. So if they're going through, they're pretty much going to keep the whole line at about that speed. They're also limited by how much current they can fight against. So the power boats with larger engines, and particularly if they can plane, they can go through with a lot more current. Like I used to go through in a 32-foot sailboat, and we would go through probably, depending on the amount of current at the max, we would go through anything from up to about an hour on either side of slack. The powerboats don't really have to worry about slack current nearly as much. The main thing is you've got to have enough power so you can handle the current, so that you keep steerage way, particularly if you're going through with the current. I wouldn't want to go through with a lot of current in a sailboat that is a maximum speed under power of about 5 knots, because you basically lose steerage going through that way. So we would prefer to go through against the current most of the time if we could. And the faster the current, the more turbulent it becomes. The south end of Dodd Narrows, usually the water's fairly flat, but as you get towards the north end of Dodd Narrows, it gets pretty turbulent, except close to slack. So that's something you have to handle. So you need to check the times of slack and what the max is. And to see, it depends on the boat as to how much time you can take off slack. A lot of the Americans who are not used to Dodd at all just always go through right on slack. The locals don't feel that they have to do that. You know your own boat. Once you've done it a few times, you reckon how much off slack you're comfortable going through. Say with our 32-foot sailboat, if the max was about 3-4 knots, we'd go through an hour away from slack, no problem. If the max was 7 or 8 knots, we wouldn't go more than about half an hour away from slack. But you get a lot of visiting boats hanging around waiting to go through right on slack, and we just go right through anyway in those circumstances. Tugs will usually call a security before they transit. I mentioned that before. They will let you know they're going through. Pleasure boats, please, please, please do not call a security. The Wagner's Cruising Guide used to suggest that you call a security before going through Dodd. That's an American publication largely. And so all the Americans used to call it, and the VHF was just clogged with people calling securities. It's not necessary. The only time you call a security is if you have some sort of a problem that makes your transit a little more difficult. We called a security once. I had to call it because we were going through under emergency steering. So for that instance, we did call it security. But other than that, please don't. The locals all get so mad when everybody's calling these things. Okay, and I did mention before that boats that throw up a big wake, please go through nice and slowly so you don't do that. Now, I think I'm going to ask Bob, going through on a sailboat, we would go, as I say, anything up to an hour away from slack, no problem, but we wouldn't go much more than that. I know that big powerboats have different experiences going through. Bob Hallstrom, can I ask you to just speak a little bit about taking a large powerboat through Dodd? Because your experience is very different from mine.
Sure. Yes, actually, and powerboats have a little different approach than a slower sailboat might, as you can imagine. But from my experience, all of what you said up to now is worth repeating. But I would add that it's my preference usually to go through in a slightly with the current, or maybe slightly against it. But certainly, I have no problems going through when the current is running fast, over 5 knots, as long as I'm going with it. I certainly do not prefer to go through against it. And the major reason for that is that there's a fair bit of debris that usually comes through there. If you're not, if you're unlucky, this debris actually can be submerged and can surface in a moment's eye. So if you're running with it, the chances are of hitting something is a lot less than it would be if you're going against it. And you can actually do something about it typically if you're going with it. The other reason why I like to go with the current slightly is that according to your collision regulations, when you're going downstream, you have right of way. Usually isn't a big issue, but if there's traffic, then it's good to know that that you have the right of way. And just another note with regards to debris, most people will find a line of debris around Round Island. If you're going south, you'll usually see a line of debris about Round Island for some reason. It just seems to collect there. And what doesn't get trapped there and goes north through it is what I've been talking about earlier, about making sure that if you're going through the narrows, try to go through with it if you're a powerboat. Another interesting thing, and you've actually hit on it a little bit, Sheila, is power boats like to go fast and sailboats can't. So what I found quite annoying is, for example, if we're going north through Dodd Narrows towards Nanaimo from the south, and we've got a bunch of trawler, hull speed boats, sailboats, trawlers and whatnot that go slow. The worst thing they can do after they transit Dodd Narrows is to fan out in all directions. And the reason why I say that is because you'll have a bunch of power boats trying to get through you to get back to Nanaimo for happy hour. So the best thing you can do is follow your straight line as much as you can and let the power boats go way around you. Because if you don't, someone's going to get rocked and rolled because these guys are not going to hang around. So, and I've actually, I'm a sailor as well as a powerboater, so I know what it's like to be rocked and rolled, but I also know, a fairly intelligent way of avoiding that if possible. So those are the kind of the little nuances that I could add to your talk here, Sheila.
Thanks, Bob. That's very helpful.
Yeah, I think that's about it. Just be aware that if you're a powerboat and you're charging through there against the current and you're way up on step, you're causing a huge wake, just remember that you are responsible for your wake. And if you cause damage, then you will be responsible for that damage to yourself, to others, and perhaps people on shore.
Good point. Thank you. Okay. So this is, for instance, the currents in Dodd today, and you can see that there were slacks at, about midnight. That's nobody wants to go through then, or probably not too many go through at 6 o'clock in the morning. But if you were planning to go today and you were leaving Nanaimo and just wanted to head down through the Gulf Islands, there's a slack at 12:17, and that would be a nice time to go through. But by 3:43, it's up to 7.6 knots. These currents are taken off the government tables that you can download from the internet. They don't print them anymore, the government tables. However, they are still in Pacific Standard Time. So if you're using the government tables, remember to convert to daylight time. Otherwise, you'll be an hour out. If you use ports and passes that some people here may be familiar with, which is another printed set of tables that are not the government tables but use the same numbers, they have already made the conversion to daylight time, so that's quite useful. And just to let you know that the flood direction in Dodd is to the north and to the northwest, and the ebb is to the south, which is shown by the negative for the ebb here.
Sheila, could I just add one point to what you were mentioning earlier?
Sure.
You mentioned that you would venture through within an hour before or after slack, typically. I think you could add that during times of wild swings from low to high tides, that judgment may be modified to suit, because you could get a larger swing in that short period of time, which may surprise some people.
Yes. Well, we always look at what the max is too, and it might only be half an hour away if it's a high max. Oh, shoot. Okay, that sort of confused me slightly. Okay, we'll move on from there then. Okay, I have another little video I'm going to show you. And this is a sailboat going through Dodd, and that boat has a fair amount of current. So it's making it up, its way up, and as I say, it's fairly south end is heading north. The south end is usually fairly flat. The boat is heading up towards the northwest end of Dodd, and getting into some of the turbulence that tends to happen as it narrows down and gets more current running. So he's doing just fine so far, but just wait a minute. He's slowing down. He's got his engine going, but he's slowing down. And then, oh dear, he's having a hard time. Another thing I didn't mention too while I was talking about going through is you do get some powerboats that go through with a dinghy on a very, very long tow. It's long, sometimes it's about 100 feet. If you're going through Dodd, shorten up that tow line, because if you do get into turbulence and the dinghy gets thrown around, it can get in the way. So this guy's just not going to make it through. Sorry about that, but he just isn't going to make it. And another one, I don't have a lot of videos in this presentation, but Dodd is more prone to having interesting videos. This just shows you what can happen. Oops, Daisy. Oh, I think I just messed that one up. I did. Sorry about that, guys. We'll go back to where we were. Try again, Sheila. Gives you an idea of how the currents can push boats around at the north end of Dodd. See, this guy's, it's a fish boat, he's got his stabilizers out, but he's still getting pushed and rocked around. If you had a boat, I mean, this doesn't happen as much with sailboats because they've got a keel which tends to stabilize them more, but you see, he could very easily, if that was a boat without stabilizers and a little less stable, that boat could quite easily be knocked right over on its side. So it's worth being aware that there can be quite nasty turbulence just as you come out the north end of Dodd Narrows. It's quite handleable. We used to get into it quite often. It's quite handleable. You don't have it if you go through right on slack, but I say we often went through off slack a bit. So it's just a choice. If you're happy handling that sort of thing, it's not a problem. And that's just a view of Dodd. Looking south, and you can see the turbulence there. And there is, if anybody's living in the Nanaimo area, there's a very nice trail known as the Cable Bay Trail that goes down right down to Joan Point at the north end of the Narrows. It's quite a climb back up. The last time we did it, my husband had heart problems and had quite a problem getting to the top. But it's a good hike, and it's kind of fun, particularly if you go down close to slack and to watch all the boats going through. We once went down on full, when it was pretty much on full flood, and spent an hour watching a sailboat trying to get through, and he kept trying and trying, and people kicked back, trying, getting kicked back, and all he was doing was basically wasting a heck of a lot of fuel and not getting anywhere. It'd have been better to back off, anchor for a couple of hours, and then try again. And that's just a tug with a log boom going through. Okay, so now we're getting down to Pirates Cove. So we came down from Dodd Narrows, if you can see my pointer, down this way, go round through Ruxton Pass up here, and the entrance to Pirates Cove is in here. Now, there's a day marker at the end of the reef there, but actually, I'll show you at the next slide, the blow up. The day marker is there. With a lot of day markers, you can actually round them fairly close to, not this one. You'll notice the reef extends quite a bit beyond the end of the day marker. So I'm going to tell you how to make sure you get around the end of the reef there. This is the main anchorage in Pirates Cove. This is also at the south end here, quite a nice little anchorage, particularly in a northerly wind, which is quite popular. I don't think it has a name, but people will often anchor there. So that's just a view of Pirates Cove. There are these docks which belong to the people that have property on DeCourcy Island, which is what this island is. I'll just back a minute. This dark line outlines the edge of the Marine Park. That whole area is park property, and you can go anywhere you like on that area, but you cannot go on to the rest of the island except along the roads. Here's the day marker that I was mentioning that you have to avoid. And right here, which is really hard to see, is the red buoy that you also have to watch for as you go in. And there is a range, which you'll see in a minute. Over here, you can probably make out a little arrow on the rocks here, which is what you use to make sure you go far enough around the day marker. Just another view, there's Pirates Cove, and there's the other anchorage to the south, which is quite sheltered from the north. So, in order to be able to enter Pirates Cove safely, the locals have put these markers in to form a range. It's not an official government range at all, but it's in all the books. They tell you all about it. It's been there for many years. I have no idea how many. And they do keep it freshly painted, so you can always see it clearly. So you have to line this arrow here on the rocks up with this cross on the tree. Once they're lined up together, then you're on a range and you can make your turn towards Pirates Cove. So you come up off the outside the reef there, up that way, until you can look across to your left and line up with that range. Then you can make your turn in towards the shore and then turn to come in this way by the red mark to enter the cove. The other important thing is, as you make your turn and you come to enter, you have got to stay close to this buoy. Don't go halfway between the buoy and the marker. Stay close to that buoy. Otherwise, you'll be in trouble. So just to repeat it again, you continue on northwards past the day beacon, and then once you're able to see the range lined up, you turn to port and you can head towards the shore. And then once you've passed the beacon, you can make a left into the entrance, but still go slowly. There's not a lot of water going in there, and always make sure that you keep really close to the red buoy on the way in, keeping it to starboard, and when you come back out again, keep it close again. Don't go halfway between the marker and the buoy. And then once you're well past the buoy, then you're clear of the entrance, you can go on in and find your place to anchor. However, as you go in that entrance close to the buoy, there is not a lot of water. So unless you're close to low tide, it's never a problem. But if you're entering close to low tide, it might be worth checking just how low the tide is going. The best tide tables to check are probably from Boat Harbour, and you can get those off the government website and download the PDF. We went in once, and we had been into Pirates Cove loads of times, never bothered checking the depth. There was always plenty. And then we went in once, had a whole bunch of family with us, went in once, and I'm looking at the depth sounder as we go in, and I'm going, ooh, that's tight. We didn't touch bottom, but it wasn't showing us much water under there. And on a subsequent student cruise, one of the boats we drew about 4.5 feet. I think that boat drew about 5.5 or 6 feet. He actually went aground going in. We pulled him off. He wasn't hard aground. But so if you think it's close to low tide, just check and see just how low that tide is going before you go in. If you're a powerboat with a shallow draft, I was talking in terms of sailboats, sorry about that, I'm conscious of having a keel hanging down there. If you've got a powerboat with a shallow draft, you probably don't even need to think about it. And yeah, anyway, never does any harm to watch your depth sounder going into any kind of a tight area. So there are a couple of dinghy docks in the cove, which is nice because you can easily get ashore without having to clamber on rocks or go in the mud. And there are a number of rings for stern ties on each side of the cove, fairly close to on the rocks along from the dinghy docks. That gets the advantage that you get people anchoring closer to the edge rather than in the middle, because the holding in Pirates Cove is not fantastic, and if you get a northerly blow, boats can drag. The other thing about using the stern ties is that you can get more boats in there because each boat is not doing a 360-degree swing at anchor. So you can get a lot more boats into a tight anchorage if you used the stern ties. Okay, the marine park is kind of a nice one, that. The park facilities do include pit toilets, which are quite reasonable ones. But there's also out close to where the marker is on the point there, there's a little parrot's chest, and somebody's put bits and pieces of stuff in there, and kids like to leave stuff and take stuff, and it's kind of fun for them. There's some information about Brother 12, and if nobody's ever heard of Brother 12, it's worth Googling some of the story. He was a leader of a cult, and he got quite a large following, and he owned, I don't know if he owned all of DeCourcy, he owned quite a lot of DeCourcy at one point and built quite a settlement there, and got a lot of money from his wealthy devotees, and it's quite a story. And there are rumors of buried gold, because they said that some of his Brother 12's gold got buried on the island somewhere, but as far as I know, lots of people have looked and nobody's ever found it. You saw the dock that the local islanders use, and we don't. There's some nice trails, not super long trails, but nice trails around in the marine park, and you can wander all around there. You can walk on the road system, but please stay off people's private property if you do walk along the roads. It gets very busy in Pirates Cove. It's a very popular anchorage, so be aware of that. And in the summer, Maple Bay Yacht Club they have park hosts that tie up to a float in the bay, and they keep track of how many boats are anchored there each night, that type of thing, but they also have information pamphlets. They'll tell you things about the park, and they'll have one boat that volunteers to be at the float for a week or a couple of weeks, and they just spend the week tied up there and welcome anybody that comes to anchor. So that's just a picture of one of the dinghy docks there. So they're kind of nice because you can tie up, but you can't tie up bigger boats, but just dinghies. And that's actually the park float there. And you can take you nicely ashore, and you don't have to clamber over the rocks or anything. Now, I don't know how many people here are used to using stern ties. It's very popular on the West Coast, not so much in other parts of Canada. But to use a stern tie, you need to have a long stern line that you use, and most people have some sort of a reel, often just a modified hose reel from a garden hose. And we had about 600 feet of polypropylene line on it. It has to be a floating line. So you just get into your dinghy, take one end of the line, go ashore, pass the line through the ring, or sometimes it's around a tree if it's not something like a park, and bring that back to your boat. So when you want to leave in the morning, you don't have to go ashore again. All you have to do is cast off the other end of the line and just wind the hose reel in. And you get a lot of people using stern ties on this part of the coast. That's an example of a stern tie using a chain. I don't know if this has been done in Pirates Cove yet, but just to let you know that in a number of other marine parks, the Marine Parks Forever Society has paid to have chains installed rather than rings. one of the problems with rings is rings are often up about this height. And so whoever goes ashore, which was always me in our case, unfortunately, has to scramble up like a monkey to try and get up the rocks to reach that ring, which can be quite a challenge at low tide. By using the chains instead of just the ring, the chain hangs down. You can come in with your dinghy, access the chain, usually without even getting out of the dinghy, just pass a line through one of the loops and take it back to the boat. So that's a definite improvement over the rings, but that's a little bit of an aside. It's nothing to do with Pirates Cove. I don't believe they have them there at the moment. Not unless they've put them in recently. So false narrows. Well, false narrows is a narrows that a lot of people, even if they've boated in this part of the world for a long time, are still very hesitant to go through, which is one reason why we like to take our students through on the student cruise, so they find out that it is quite feasible to do it, even with quite large sailboats, and that provided you know what you're doing, it's not a problem. So the main thing is there's this large reef right down the middle, and as you come in, and usually the reef's not visible, it's low tide it is, but usually it's not. So if you come in, all you see is a nice wide stretch of water, much wider than Dodd Narrows, but you sure don't want to go down the middle. So the main thing you have to worry about in false narrows is the depth. Do you have enough depth? And being very careful as to how you navigate through. Much, much less busy than Dodd. Not a lot of people really go through falls, but you know, sometimes in a sailboat where we might have to wait several hours before the current was slow enough that we wanted to go through, then we could rather go through Dodd. We could look at falls, find out if there was plenty of water in falls, and rather than waiting to go through Dodd for several hours, we just go through falls instead. But you don't get a huge number of boats going through there. And the first time you do it, yeah, probably not a bad idea to make sure you've got loads of water so that you get comfortable going through before you take it a little bit more chancily. Once you know what you're doing, it's not much of a big deal. And yeah, as long as, probably if you're going through and you know exactly where you're going, as long as you have your draft plus a meter, you're probably all right. It's nice to have more, but you should be able to do it that way. And then, yeah, if you want to have more, that's always nice. But you know what?
Sheila,
Yeah.
Alexa has raised a hand.
Okay, Alexa, just unmute yourself and say your bit.
Will do. I just wanted to add on to your saying, don't go down the middle. When my husband and I first moved here, we knew nothing about tides, and we actually had a 19-foot boat, and we're running down the middle of Dodds at high speed, and all of a sudden it was like the clams and oysters started to wave at us.
You mean
That
falls, not Dodd?
I'm sorry, false narrows, yes. And it ended up with me splayed on the bow of the boat, pointing towards where the darker water was, because once we came off plane, of course, we were churning up the bottom.
Yeah, I think you're not the only people who have done that by any means. It's one reason for knowing what you're doing with charts. No question
You
about
bet.
that. Yeah, so what I was going to say was, it's nice to have an extra 6 feet under rather than 3 feet, but if you've got a deep keeled sailboat, there wouldn't be a lot of the time probably that you would get that much water under your keel. So when you're going through, as we mentioned before, it can be pretty darn shallow going through there. You can get the tide table highs and lows, which give you when it's high, when it's low. But if you want to get the in-between, and yeah, use Boat Harbour again, probably, because Boat Harbour gives better numbers and more conservative numbers than the Nanaimo Harbour tables. But if you're using ports and passes, Boat Harbour's a secondary, and that involves a little bit more work. We used to use Nanaimo, but we kind of knew how much water at Nanaimo we needed to have to get through. it's like anything else. Once you've done it a few times and you know your own boat and you know what you can do, then you can sort of make your calculations accordingly. But others and I'll show you a graph later, but other ones, a lot of programs like Navionics will actually give you a graph of the tide tables. And that way you can read off how much water you have at a particular time, which is very helpful. And I'll show you one later. The least depth that's shown at datum in the channel is 0.3 of a meter. On the other hand, you always have to remember that that's what the chart shows, but who knows what may have silted up or changed, or there might be the odd rock that's maybe a little bit sticking up or whatever. So you can never 100% rely on that, I guess, but that's what we work on. So as you're going through, you just watch your depth sounder like there's no tomorrow. The actual channel is about 160 feet wide, they say, and about 500 meters long, 50 meters wide, and about 500 meters long between the two sets of ranges that you have to go through. From the northwest, it's quite straightforward to start into it. You just follow the channel, but entering from the southeast, you really have to hug the shore of Magellan until you're lined up on the southern range. So I thought I had another. Okay, I do have another diagram of which I'll talk through again as to how going through. But okay, if you the least depth you're going to have at datum, that's the lowest tide that you're likely to get, is 0.3 of a meter. So for instance, if your draft was 1.6 meters and you want a safety measure of an extra meter, then the depth that you're going to need is 2.6 meters. Now, you've got 0.3 meters at low tide at datum. So the least depth from a tide table that you could rely on in this case would be 2.3 meters. So in this particular example, it's not for today, but if you're looking at 2.6 meters, would be about here. So if you go across, anytime from 10 a.m. onwards, you've got less depth than you want, and you would not want to try going through again until about probably 7 o'clock at night. So on that particular day, if you had a keel of 1.6 meters, you would not want to go through faults between about 10 o'clock in the morning and 7 o'clock at night. And you have to check that out carefully before you go through.
Sheila,
Yeah.
just add to that. Some sailors, the bolder ones, will maybe choose to go in with a little bit less water, but they will only go through on a rising tide.
That is a good idea if you think you're a bit iffy. I may say this gentleman who's just talking is the one who talked me into taking our boat through with less water than I was really comfortable with, but we made it, didn't we, Bob?
I think it was a rising tide, Sheila.
I hope so. So I'm just going to go through the actual how you would do it again. I showed you this particular chart a little earlier, but as you're approaching, there's plenty of water coming in from the Nanaimo side, plenty of water most of the way in here. But as you get closer to the Narrows, you want to be staying over to the Mudge Island side until you can get yourself lined up on this range here. And once you're lined up on the range, it looks on the chart as though you're going pretty darn close to the end of the reef, but if you're lined up on the range, you're fine. You go in on the range, you're pretty close to the Gabriola Island side, and then you turn and you come along this way. It's funny because when you're in the boat doing this, it feels as though you're awfully close to Gabriola, but in actual fact, you have to be. And you carry on along here until you're lined up on the other range. Now you're going to head out this way, so it's a back range, so you're having to look backwards at yourself all the time to find out that you're still on the range, or you have somebody telling you which way to point. And you head out this way until you're almost over, and I'm watching your depth sounder too, but until you're almost over at Mudge Island, and then you carry on down this way, keeping fairly close to Mudge and watching your depth sounder, and you're fine. Now, once you've been through a few times, for instance, if I'm coming from the south to the north and I come up through this way and I've got a back range because I'm heading out this way and the range is behind me, once I'm on the range here, once I make my turn, I actually know that there is a dock over on this shore here. If I point my bow right towards that dock, I'm going to stay on the range. And similarly, on this one, if I'm doing a back range, I know from having done it a bunch of times that there's a particular tree, if I can eyeball it, that will keep me on the range without having to keep looking back at the range. But that's something you only get by having gone through there a few times. So that's one of the ranges as you go into Dodd Narrows. Well off the range there. And of course, I hope you all know that if you're off a range like that, you steer towards the lower marker to bring yourself back onto the range. And here we are right on the range. And if you head in this direction now, you'll be safe. You'll be in good water. Not a problem. Now, what people do, of course, nowadays, in these days of electronics, is a lot of people have chart plotters. And one of the nicest things to be able to do is once you've been through once with your boat, you can leave the trail that you've made. Don't erase it, which all chart plotters will allow you to do, but don't erase it. Leave that trail, and the next time you go through, you can just follow the trail because you knew you did it last time, it worked. Do it again. So that's what a lot of people will do. They will just use the trail that they've used in the past, and that's pretty good. And you can see here's the range that you went in on. Here's the range that you're going out on again. So thank God for chart plotters. They do have their uses, but you can get through without one. No question about that. There are currents and faults narrows. According to the books, their value of the strength is about 50% of that in Dodd, and you can make all sorts of corrections. But you know what? Most people that I know don't even bother check the currents for going through faults. We never did. And maybe it's because it's wide and you don't get any turbulence or anything, but we were never affected by current and faults, and we didn't even look to see how close we were to the max or not. And the most we had to do was just a little bit of crabbing as we went in on the range, but I wouldn't spend a whole lot of time checking the currents as you're going through faults. And there's just some resources. Definitely need your charts, there's no question about that, and know how to use them. Ports and Passes is Tides and Current Tables with a book that's commercially printed with all the same numbers as the government tables. And they have made the correction for daylight saving time, which is kind of nice. And they also have quite a lot of other useful information in there. The Wagoner Cruising Guide is my go-to cruising guide for this part of the world, all the way up the coast. Very, very well written, kept constantly up to date, excellent. I haven't used the Dream Speaker, but it's another good one as well, I believe. They're not printing the government tide and current tables anymore. There's a free download, but then, as I say, you do have to either have access to a computer or something to or print out the ones you think you're going to need for that day. And the sailing directions, that's available from the government too as a free download. We had the printed version on our boat. Frankly, when we bought the boat, it came with the boat, and I thought I'd used it a lot, and I didn't, because I came to the conclusion it was much more written for commercial boats than for small pleasure boats rather. So anyway, that's all I had to say. Where any of us that have been through a bunch of times, and a bunch of us that are here have been through all these places a bunch of times, definitely open to have a discussion, questions, whatever, if anybody wants to hang in for a bit and just talk. We can open